Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Trevor Hayes had built his life on three unshakable principles. Loyalty demanded loyalty, betrayal demanded retribution, and family was everything. At 38, he owned the most successful private security firm in Phoenix, specializing in corporate espionage and personal protection for high-profile clients. His methods were unconventional, sometimes operating in legal gray areas, but his results were flawless. Trevor's childhood had forged his iron will. Raised by a single mother after his father abandoned them, he'd watched her work 3 jobs to keep food on the table. When she died of exhaustion at 42, teenage Trevor had tracked down his father and delivered a beating that left the man hospitalized for weeks. The lesson was clear: abandonment and betrayal had consequences. Diana Hayes seemed to embody everything Trevor valued. They'd met 8 years ago when she was a pediatric nurse at Phoenix Children's Hospital. Her gentleness with sick children, her apparent devotion to helping others, had softened Trevor's hardened edges. She was beautiful in an understated way: honey blonde hair, warm brown eyes, and a smile that seemed genuine. When their daughter Emma was born 5 years ago, Trevor believed he'd finally found his anchor. Emma was Trevor's world. The 5-year-old had inherited her mother's gentle spirit, but her father's fierce intelligence. She asked questions that amazed him, drew pictures that revealed an artist's eye, and trusted him completely. Every evening, Trevor would read to her, and she'd fall asleep holding his hand. She called him her hero daddy, and Trevor wore that title with more pride than any business success. Diana had seemed to settle into their comfortable suburban life. They lived in a sprawling ranch house in Scottsdale, complete with Emma's playground in the backyard and Diana's garden. Trevor provided well. Diana drove a new BMW, wore designer clothes, and wanted for nothing. He traveled frequently for work, sometimes for weeks at a time, but trusted Diana implicitly to care for their daughter. The cracks began showing 6 months ago, though Trevor hadn't recognized them as warning signs. Diana became distant, claiming fatigue from long hospital shifts. She started working overtime more frequently, sometimes not coming home until after Emma was asleep. When Trevor tried to be intimate, Diana would deflect with excuses about being tired or stressed. She became secretive about her phone, taking calls in other rooms, and quickly ending conversations when Trevor appeared. But Diana maintained her role as loving mother. She still tucked Emma in, still made her favorite pancakes on Sunday mornings, still attended every school event. Trevor rationalized that whatever was bothering Diana, her love for Emma remained constant. That assumption would prove to be his greatest mistake. The day everything changed started like any other. Trevor was preparing for a 3-day trip to Los Angeles, consulting for a tech mogul receiving death threats. Emma had hugged him goodbye that morning, making him promise to bring back her favorite strawberry candy. Diana had kissed his cheek with what seemed like genuine affection, though Trevor would later recognize the guilt in her eyes. The call came at 2:47 p.m. Pacific time. Diana's voice was shaking, but her words were clear. "There's been an accident. Emma, she fell from the climbing structure at the park. Trevor, she's gone." Trevor's world imploded. The flight back to Phoenix was a blur of anguish and disbelief. At the hospital, Diana was surrounded by colleagues offering comfort. She clung to Trevor when he arrived, sobbing into his chest. But even through his own devastating grief, something felt wrong. Diana's tears seemed forced, her grief performative. When he asked for details about the accident, her story was vague and inconsistent. The police investigation was brief. Emma had apparently climbed too high on the playground equipment at Chaparral Park, while Diana was momentarily distracted by a phone call. A tragic accident. These things happened. The case was closed within days. Chapter 2. The Unraveling. The funeral was a nightmare. Trevor stood at Emma's small casket, his heart shattered beyond repair, while Diana played the grieving mother for the assembled crowd. Friends and family offered condolences that felt hollow. Trevor's business partner, Marcus Rivera, handled the firm's operations while Trevor drowned in grief. But it was Diana's behavior that began to alarm him. The day after the funeral, she was already discussing moving forward and finding closure. When Trevor announced he was taking indefinite leave from work to grieve, Diana seemed annoyed rather than understanding. "Dwelling on tragedy won't bring her back," she said with startling coldness. A week later, Trevor caught Diana laughing during a phone conversation. When he confronted her, She claimed it was a colleague trying to cheer her up. But the laughter had been too genuine, too carefree for a mother who'd just buried her child. Trevor's instincts, honed by years of security work, began to surface through his grief. He started paying attention to details he'd previously missed. Diana's phone was always face down now. She'd changed her passcode. She took showers immediately after returning home, claiming the hospital smell bothered her. Most damning, she seemed relieved by Emma's death rather than devastated. 2 weeks after the funeral, Diana suggested they take a vacation. "We need to get away from all these painful reminders," she said, gesturing around Emma's bedroom, which Trevor had left untouched. The suggestion was so inappropriate, so callous, that Trevor felt his old, ruthless nature stirring beneath the grief. That night, while Diana slept, Trevor accessed her laptop using techniques his security firm employed. What he found confirmed his darkest suspicions. Hidden in encrypted folders were months of communications with someone named Luke Patterson. The messages were explicit, passionate, and utterly damning. Diana had been planning to leave Trevor for months, but Emma was complicating things. The final message, sent the day before Emma's death, was chilling. "After tomorrow, nothing will stand in our way." Trevor's hands shook as he read further. Luke Patterson was a pharmaceutical sales representative who'd met Diana at the hospital. Divorced, no children, and apparently eager to start fresh with Diana, without the burden of a stepdaughter. The messages revealed a relationship built on deception and selfishness, with Emma treated as an obstacle to be overcome rather than a child to be loved. But the most damning evidence was a deleted video file Trevor recovered using professional-grade software. The file showed Luke at Chaparral Park the day Emma died, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, filming from a distance. The timestamp matched the time of Emma's accident. Trevor watched in horrified fascination as his daughter played alone on the climbing structure while Diana sat on a bench, deliberately ignoring her. The video captured Emma's fall, but more importantly, it showed Diana's complete lack of reaction. No scream, no rush to help, no apparent surprise. She sat for nearly 30 seconds before finally calling for help. Trevor's grief transformed into something far more dangerous. His daughter hadn't died in an accident. She'd been murdered through neglect and conspiracy. Diana and Luke had orchestrated Emma's death to clear the path for their relationship. They'd counted on Trevor's trust and grief to blind him to the truth. They'd made a fatal error. Trevor Hayes didn't forgive betrayal, and he never forgot injustice. Diana and Luke had declared war on everything he held sacred. Now they would learn why Trevor's business competitors feared him, why his enemies often disappeared from Phoenix entirely, and why crossing him was a mistake people rarely lived to repeat. Chapter 3. The Discovery. Trevor spent the next week in careful reconnaissance, his grief temporarily compartmentalized behind the cold efficiency that had built his empire. During the day, he played the grieving husband, allowing Diana to believe her deception remained hidden. At night, he methodically dissected every aspect of Diana and Luke's relationship, building a comprehensive profile of both targets. Luke Patterson was 34, divorced after his ex-wife discovered his affair with a hospital administrator 2 years prior. He worked for Meridian Pharmaceuticals, covering the Southwest Territory. His sales record was mediocre, his personality charming but shallow. He drove a leased Lexus, lived in a trendy downtown loft, and had accumulated significant debt trying to maintain an image beyond his means. Luke was a predator who targeted women with resources, and Diana's nurse's salary plus Trevor's wealth had made her an irresistible mark. What Trevor discovered about Luke's character was even more damning. The man had a history of manipulating women, using emotional vulnerability to exploit them financially and sexually. His ex-wife had lost their house in the divorce after Luke had convinced her to co-sign loans for his business ventures that never materialized. There was a pattern of targeting recently divorced or widowed women, love-bombing them with attention, then systematically isolating them from friends and family. Diana, Trevor realized, had been the perfect victim. Feeling neglected during Trevor's frequent business trips, she'd been vulnerable to Luke's calculated charm. The messages Trevor found revealed Luke's manipulation techniques, constant validation, promises of a better life, and gradual poisoning of Diana's feelings toward her husband and daughter. Luke had convinced Diana that Trevor didn't truly appreciate her, that Emma was holding her back from happiness, and that they deserved better. But the most chilling revelation came when Trevor hacked into Luke's personal devices. Hidden in Luke's cloud storage were recordings of their sexual encounters, including sessions where they'd fantasized about Trevor's death in explicit detail. Luke had been collecting blackmail material, insurance against Diana ever trying to leave him. The recordings revealed Luke's true nature, a cold-blooded manipulator who'd been planning to control Diana completely once Trevor was out of the picture. More disturbing were Luke's internet searches in the weeks before Emma's death. Child accident statistics, playground safety failures, how long before life insurance pays out, and undetectable poisons for children. Luke hadn't just encouraged Diana's neglect. He'd been researching ways to ensure Emma's death looked accidental. Trevor's investigation revealed the full scope of their plan. Diana was to inherit everything if Trevor died unexpectedly, but Emma's existence complicated matters. As Trevor's daughter, Emma would inherit half his estate, with Diana as trustee. Luke had convinced Diana that removing Emma first would simplify their eventual murder of Trevor, ensuring Diana received everything. They'd planned to wait 6 months after Emma's death, then arrange Trevor's accident during one of his business trips. The phone call that had changed everything came from an unexpected source. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had been worried about Emma's behavior in her final days. The child had drawn disturbing pictures of herself falling, and had told classmates she was scared of mommy's friend. Mrs. Rodriguez had tried calling Diana to discuss her concerns, but had been dismissed. Now, racked with guilt, she'd called Trevor to share what she'd observed. Emma knew something was wrong, Mrs. Rodriguez explained through tears. She drew a picture the day before the accident. It showed a man watching her fall while a woman sat on a bench. She wrote help in crayon across the bottom. Trevor's blood turned to ice. Emma had sensed the danger, had tried to communicate her fear, but the adults who should have protected her had failed. His innocent daughter had died knowing she was unloved by her mother and threatened by a monster. The breaking point came when Trevor found the drawing Mrs. Rodriguez had described, hidden in Emma's bedroom desk. His 5-year-old daughter had somehow understood that she was in mortal danger, and the crude crayon figures were heartbreakingly accurate. The woman on the bench had Diana's blonde hair. The watching man wore Luke's distinctive red baseball cap. Emma had drawn herself falling, but she'd also drawn herself holding Trevor's hand in the corner of the paper with the word Daddy in careful letters. That night, Trevor sat in Emma's room, holding her final drawing, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. The last remnants of his civilized facade crumbled away, revealing the predator that had always lurked beneath. Diana and Luke had murdered his daughter and planned to murder him. They'd counted on his love and trust to blind him to their evil. They'd made one critical miscalculation. Trevor Hayes had spent 20 years learning to destroy people professionally. He knew how to end careers, relationships, and lives without leaving fingerprints. He understood psychology, manipulation, and the kind of pressure that drove people to madness. Diana and Luke thought they were playing with a grieving husband and father. They were about to discover they'd declared war on the most dangerous man in Phoenix. Chapter 4: The Hunting Ground. Trevor's transformation from grieving husband to calculating predator was seamless and terrifying. For the next month, he maintained perfect appearances while methodically constructing what would become Diana and Luke's hell. His security firm's resources provided unlimited access to surveillance equipment, background information, and personnel skilled in the darker arts of human destruction. Diana remained oblivious to Trevor's knowledge, interpreting his quiet grief as depression she could exploit. She began subtly suggesting therapy, claiming concern for his mental health, while secretly hoping to establish a record of Trevor's instability for their planned murder. Her performance as the caring wife was flawless to outside observers, but Trevor now recognized every gesture as calculated manipulation. Luke, meanwhile, grew increasingly bold. The phone records Trevor accessed showed Luke calling Diana multiple times daily, even during Emma's memorial service. Security footage from Luke's building revealed Diana visiting his apartment twice a week, always during her supposed hospital shifts. They were becoming careless, drunk on their perceived success, and eager to move forward with Phase 2 of their plan. Trevor's first move was establishing his own death timeline. He informed his business partner Marcus that he needed extended time away from the firm to heal. He made appointments with grief counselors, creating a paper trail of psychological distress. He updated his will, ensuring Diana would inherit everything if he died within the next year. To outside observers, Trevor Hayes was a broken man slowly crumbling under loss. In reality, Trevor was assembling the pieces of an intricate revenge plot that would destroy Diana and Luke's lives systematically. He'd learned long ago that quick deaths were mercy his enemies didn't deserve. What he planned was psychological warfare designed to drive them to madness before delivering final justice. Phase 1 involved Luke's career. Trevor's security firm had contracts with several pharmaceutical companies, including Meridian's primary competitor, Apex Medical. Using his connections, Trevor arranged for Apex to file a complaint alleging Luke had been selling proprietary information to competitors. The accusation was false, but Trevor ensured the evidence appeared convincing. Modified emails, suspicious financial transactions traced to Luke's accounts, and testimony from a paid informant claiming Luke had offered to sell trade secrets. Luke's response was predictably panicked. He denied everything, but corporate investigations didn't require courtroom standards of evidence. Within 2 weeks, Luke was suspended pending review. His reputation in the pharmaceutical industry was destroyed overnight, and other companies refused to even interview him. But Trevor's manipulation went deeper. He'd learned Luke's psychological weaknesses from analyzing the man's communication patterns and personal history. Luke was fundamentally a coward who relied on charm and manipulation because he lacked genuine strength. Strip away his confidence and resources, and Luke would crumble. Trevor began a campaign of psychological terrorism designed to fracture Luke's sense of reality. Using his firm's surveillance experts, Trevor arranged for Luke to be followed constantly by rotating teams. Never close enough to be obvious, but always present enough to be felt. Luke would spot the same face in crowds, the same car following his route, the same person in different locations throughout his day. The pressure escalated when Trevor's team began accessing Luke's apartment. They never stole anything or left obvious evidence, but subtle changes accumulated. Books moved to different shelves, food rearranged in the refrigerator, clothing hung in different orders. Luke's growing paranoia was evident in his increasingly frantic calls to Diana, claiming someone was watching him and entering his home. Diana, still unaware of Trevor's knowledge, tried to calm Luke while hiding her growing concern. She suggested Luke was stressed about losing his job, but privately began wondering if her lover was mentally unstable. Trevor's psychological pressure was designed to drive a wedge between the conspirators, forcing them to doubt each other's reliability. The campaign intensified when Trevor's hackers began manipulating Luke's digital life. His computer would turn on by itself in the middle of the night, displaying photos of Emma. His phone would receive calls that consisted only of children's laughter, then disconnect when he answered. His smart TV would randomly change channels to news reports about child deaths. Luke's deteriorating mental state was exactly what Trevor had predicted. The man who'd coldly planned a child's murder was revealed as a coward who couldn't handle being hunted. His desperate calls to Diana became increasingly irrational, claiming someone was trying to drive him insane. Diana began avoiding Luke's calls, frustrated by his apparent breakdown. But Trevor's most devastating psychological weapon was yet to come. Using the recordings Luke had made of his encounters with Diana, Trevor began a campaign of gradual revelation that would destroy both conspirators' trust in each other and their sanity. Chapter 5: The Tightening Noose. Trevor's psychological assault on Diana began with surgical precision. He started leaving subtle evidence of his knowledge around their home, evidence only a guilty person would recognize. A printed email from Luke would appear briefly on Diana's nightstand, then disappear before she could confront Trevor about it. Security footage from Chaparral Park would be minimized on Trevor's laptop screen when Diana passed his office. Photos of Luke's apartment building would be scattered among Trevor's work documents. Diana's growing paranoia was delicious to observe. She began searching Trevor's belongings frantically, looking for proof he suspected her. She found nothing concrete, but the psychological pressure was mounting. Diana started making mistakes, forgetting to delete text messages, leaving Luke's business card in her purse, taking suspicious phone calls while Trevor was nearby. Luke's situation deteriorated further when Trevor arranged for the police to receive an anonymous tip about Luke's presence at Chaparral Park the day Emma died. The tip included a copy of Luke's video footage, edited to appear as though a concerned citizen had recorded it. Detective Sarah Chun, who'd originally classified Emma's death as accidental, reopened the investigation. The police questioning shattered Luke's remaining composure. When they showed him the video footage, Luke panicked and demanded a lawyer. His nervous behavior and inconsistent answers about why he'd been at the park convinced Detective Chun that Emma's death warranted deeper investigation. Though they couldn't prove criminal intent yet, Luke was now officially a person of interest in a child's death. Trevor watched Luke's interrogation through security cameras his firm had quietly installed in the police station months earlier for a different case. Luke's weakness was pathetic. The man who'd coldly planned a child's murder couldn't handle basic police questioning without falling apart. Every lie Luke told was documented, creating inconsistencies that would eventually destroy any defense. Diana's reaction to Luke's police troubles was even more revealing. Instead of standing by her lover, she began distancing herself, terrified of being connected to the investigation. Her selfish nature emerged as she prioritized her own safety over Luke's welfare. She stopped answering his calls and refused to see him, claiming the police scrutiny made contact too dangerous. Luke's desperation reached new heights when Trevor arranged for him to lose his apartment. Using connections in real estate and property management, Trevor ensured Luke's lease was terminated for suspicious activities reported by neighbors. Luke's mounting debt from unemployment made finding new housing impossible. He was forced to move into a seedy motel on the outskirts of Phoenix, further destroying his self-image and psychological stability. The isolation and pressure were breaking Luke exactly as Trevor had planned. The man who'd been so confident orchestrating a child's death was now a paranoid, unemployed drifter living in squalor. But Trevor's revenge was just beginning. Phase 2 involved destroying Diana's professional life with the same methodical precision. Trevor's security firm had extensive connections in healthcare administration, and Diana's infidelity gave him the perfect weapon. Arizona had strict ethics codes for healthcare workers, particularly regarding relationships that might compromise patient care. Trevor arranged for Diana's supervisor to receive anonymous reports about her emotional state affecting her work performance. Colleagues began noticing Diana's distraction and paranoia. Her patient care, once exemplary, became sloppy as her guilt and fear consumed her. Medical errors started accumulating in her record, minor mistakes that could be attributed to grief initially, but formed a pattern of declining competence. The crushing blow came when Trevor revealed Luke's recordings to Diana's hospital administrators. The explicit videos, combined with evidence of Diana's deception about her whereabouts during work hours, violated multiple ethical standards. Diana was suspended pending investigation, her nursing license in jeopardy. But Trevor's cruelest psychological weapon was the gradual revelation of Luke's true nature. Using Luke's own recordings and communications, Trevor showed Diana how thoroughly she'd been manipulated and used. He arranged for Diana to discover Luke's history of exploiting women, his financial schemes, and most devastatingly, his blackmail recordings of their encounters. The moment Diana realized Luke had been recording their intimate moments for leverage, her love turned to horror and rage. She finally understood she'd been a victim as much as a conspirator. Luke's romantic promises were revealed as calculated manipulation, and Diana saw herself as just another mark in his pattern of exploitation. Trevor watched Diana's psychological breakdown with cold satisfaction. The woman who'd betrayed their marriage and murdered their daughter was finally experiencing the consequences of her choices. But Diana's revelation about Luke's manipulation also served Trevor's larger purpose, turning the conspirators against each other. When Diana confronted Luke about the recordings, their relationship exploded in mutual accusations and recriminations. Luke, cornered and desperate, revealed details about their planning that Diana had hoped to keep hidden. Diana, horrified by Luke's recording and blackmail schemes, threatened to expose him to save herself. Trevor had successfully turned Diana and Luke into enemies who would destroy each other trying to save themselves. But his revenge was far from complete. The psychological torture had been preparation for the final phase, a reckoning that would deliver the justice Emma deserved. Chapter 6: The Breaking Point. Trevor's systematic destruction of Diana and Luke's lives reached its crescendo when he arranged the most psychologically devastating revelation yet. Using his security firm's resources, he orchestrated a scenario that would force both conspirators to confront the full horror of their actions while revealing their complete moral bankruptcy. The setup began with Trevor announcing to Diana that he'd decided to create a memorial scholarship in Emma's name. He claimed grief counseling had helped him channel his pain into something positive. Diana, still maintaining her facade of loving mother, was forced to participate enthusiastically or risk exposure. The irony of honoring the daughter she'd murdered was exquisite psychological torture. Trevor arranged for the scholarship announcement to be covered by local media, ensuring Diana would be photographed and interviewed about Emma's tragic accident. Watching Diana perform maternal grief for cameras while knowing the truth was nauseating, but Trevor needed the public record of her deception for his final plans. The media attention had an unexpected consequence. Other parents from Emma's school came forward with disturbing observations about Diana's behavior. Mrs. Rodriguez's initial call had encouraged other teachers and parents to share their concerns. A pattern emerged of Diana's neglect and indifference toward Emma in the months before her death. Detective Chun incorporated these new witnesses into her expanding investigation. The case was no longer a simple accident. It was potential child endangerment with suspicious circumstances. Diana's growing panic was evident as she realized how many people had noticed her poor parenting and strange behavior. Luke's situation became desperate when Trevor arranged for his motel room to be searched by police following an anonymous tip about drug possession. Though no drugs were found, the search revealed Luke's obsessive surveillance equipment and photos of Emma from before her death. The evidence suggested stalking behavior that further implicated Luke in the child's death. The discovery of Luke's surveillance materials confirmed Detective Chin's suspicions that Emma's death was no accident. Luke was arrested and charged with stalking and child endangerment, with additional charges pending the investigation's outcome. His fingerprints on the playground equipment, combined with video evidence of his presence, created a compelling case for conspiracy. But Trevor's most devastating blow came when he arranged for Diana to discover the full extent of Luke's manipulation and betrayal. Using Luke's own recordings and messages, Trevor created a comprehensive dossier showing how Luke had orchestrated not just Emma's death, but Diana's complete psychological destruction. The dossier revealed that Luke had been planning to murder Trevor and frame Diana for the crime, leaving him free to inherit Trevor's wealth through Diana's subsequent suicide over guilt for killing her husband. Luke's messages to other women showed he'd described Diana as psychologically weak and easily manipulated, a temporary tool to be discarded once she'd served her purpose. Diana's realization that Luke had planned to murder her after using her to kill Emma and Trevor shattered her remaining psychological defenses. She'd believed herself Luke's partner in crime, but discovered she was merely another victim in his larger scheme. The woman who'd murdered her own daughter for love had been deceived by a man who felt nothing but contempt for her. The psychological revelation drove Diana to attempt suicide, but Trevor's surveillance team intervened at the crucial moment. He needed Diana alive for the final phase of his revenge. Her suicide would have been too merciful. She needed to live with the consequences of her choices and face justice for Emma's murder. Diana's hospitalization following her suicide attempt created the perfect opportunity for Trevor's final manipulation. He visited her in the psychiatric ward, presenting himself as the devoted husband concerned for his wife's mental health. To the medical staff, Trevor appeared to be a grief-stricken man trying to help his traumatized wife recover from their shared tragedy. In private, Trevor revealed to Diana that he knew everything. He showed her the evidence of her affair, her conspiracy with Luke, and the premeditated nature of Emma's murder. Diana's horror at being discovered was compounded by her realization that Trevor had been orchestrating Luke's downfall and her psychological torture for weeks. "You murdered our daughter," Trevor said quietly, his voice devoid of emotion. "You betrayed everything sacred, and you thought you'd gotten away with it. Now you'll spend the rest of your life knowing that Emma's death was meaningless. Luke never loved you. He used you and planned to kill you. You destroyed everything for nothing." Diana's complete psychological breakdown was exactly what Trevor had orchestrated. The woman who'd coldly planned a child's death was now a broken shell facing the consequences of her evil. But Trevor's revenge still had one final, devastating chapter to complete. Chapter 7, The Reckoning. Trevor's final phase began with a carefully orchestrated revelation that would expose Diana and Luke's crimes to the world while ensuring they faced maximum legal consequences. But first, he had one more psychological torture to inflict, a confrontation that would destroy any remaining shred of their humanity. Using his connections in the legal system, Trevor arranged for Luke to be released on bail, knowing the desperate man would immediately try to contact Diana. Trevor wanted them to have one final meeting where they would turn on each other completely, providing him with recorded evidence of their confessions. The meeting took place in Diana's hospital room, which Trevor had equipped with hidden cameras and microphones through his security firm's resources. Luke, unshaven and paranoid from weeks of psychological pressure, confronted Diana about her suicide attempt and hospitalization. He accused her of weakness and cowardice, terrified she would confess their crimes to save herself. Diana, her mental state shattered by the revelation of Luke's true nature and Trevor's manipulation, lashed out with vicious honesty. She detailed how Luke had convinced her to neglect Emma, how he'd researched ways to make the death look accidental, and how he'd recorded their intimate moments for blackmail. Her desperate attempt to shift blame onto Luke revealed the full scope of their conspiracy. Luke's response was equally damning. Terrified of facing murder charges alone, he confessed how Diana had provided detailed information about Emma's routines and Trevor's travel schedule. He revealed Diana's active participation in planning not just Emma's death, but Trevor's eventual murder. The recorded conversation captured both conspirators confessing to premeditated murder while trying to save themselves. But Trevor's cruelest revelation was yet to come. As Diana and Luke destroyed each other with accusations, Trevor entered the room carrying a small recorder. He played back their conversation, letting them hear their own confessions. Then he delivered the final blow. "Emma knew," Trevor said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute judgment. "She drew pictures of you watching her fall, Luke. She told her teacher she was scared of Mommy's friend. My daughter died knowing her mother didn't love her and that a monster was hunting her. She was 5 years old, and she died afraid and alone because of you." Trevor showed them Emma's final drawing, the crude crayon figures depicting her murder with heartbreaking accuracy. Diana's screams of anguish at seeing her daughter's final artwork were captured on recording. Luke's attempt to deny his involvement crumbled as Trevor played security footage showing Luke filming Emma's death from across the park. "You want to know the truth about that phone call I received?" Trevor continued, referencing the mysterious call mentioned in Emma's drawing. "It was from a private investigator I'd hired weeks ago. He found Emma's body had been moved before the paramedics arrived. Diana, you repositioned our daughter to make her injuries look consistent with a fall from a different height. You manipulated a dead child's body to cover your crime." The revelation that Diana had physically manipulated Emma's corpse to hide evidence was the final horror. Even Luke was sickened by this detail, finally understanding the depth of Diana's depravity. Diana's complete psychological collapse was total and irreversible. Trevor's security team, coordinating with Detective Chun, arrested both conspirators on the spot. The recorded confessions, combined with months of accumulated evidence, guaranteed conviction for first-degree murder. Arizona's death penalty statute for killing children ensured Diana and Luke would face execution for their crimes. But Trevor's revenge extended beyond legal justice. He'd systematically destroyed every aspect of their lives: careers, relationships, mental health, and future prospects. Even if they somehow avoided execution, they would live as broken, paranoid shells of their former selves. Diana's nursing license was permanently revoked amid revelations of patient endangerment during her affair. Luke's criminal record made him unemployable in any legitimate field. Their families, horrified by the murder conviction, disowned them completely. They would die friendless, disgraced, and forgotten. Trevor's final act was ensuring Emma's true story became public. He released the recordings and evidence to media outlets, exposing the full horror of what Diana and Luke had done. The public outrage was swift and merciless. Two adults who'd murdered an innocent child for selfish desires became the most hated criminals in Arizona history. The trial was a national sensation, with Trevor's testimony providing devastating evidence of premeditation and cruelty. His composed delivery of facts, contrasted with Diana and Luke's obvious guilt and mutual hatred, ensured swift conviction. The jury deliberated less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Trevor felt no satisfaction in the convictions. Justice for Emma couldn't restore her life or fill the void in his heart. But he'd honored his daughter's memory by ensuring her killers faced consequences for their evil. Diana and Luke would spend their remaining years on death row, knowing they'd destroyed their lives for nothing. Chapter 8. The Aftermath. The months following Diana and Luke's conviction brought Trevor a cold sense of completion rather than peace. Emma's killers had been exposed, tried, and sentenced to death, but vengeance couldn't resurrect his murdered daughter. Trevor found himself examining the elaborate revenge he'd orchestrated, recognizing that destroying Diana and Luke had become as much about his own nature as seeking justice for Emma. The trial had revealed details that shocked even seasoned prosecutors. Diana's manipulation of Emma's body after death, Luke's extensive surveillance and planning, and their mutual betrayal during the investigation painted a picture of depravity that horrified the public. Death threats against both convicts required them to be held in protective custody, though Trevor suspected their fellow inmates would eventually deliver their own justice. Trevor's security firm had grown substantially during the months he'd focused on revenge. His methodical destruction of Diana and Luke had demonstrated capabilities that attracted new clients seeking similar services. Corporate executives facing blackmail, politicians targeted by enemies, and wealthy individuals needing protection from various threats found Trevor's combination of legal expertise and ruthless effectiveness irresistible. Marcus Rivera, Trevor's business partner, had managed the firm expertly during Trevor's absence, but was disturbed by the change in his friend. Trevor's already cold efficiency had hardened into something approaching sociopathy. He showed no emotion during client meetings, spoke in calculated measurements rather than human terms, and had eliminated any pretense of mercy from his professional vocabulary. "You got justice for Emma," Marcus said during one of their monthly reviews. "But somewhere in that process, you became something else. Something that scares even me." Trevor's response was characteristic of his new mindset. "I became what Emma needed me to become. Diana and Luke counted on my humanity to blind me to their evil. I won't make that mistake again." The statement revealed Trevor's fundamental transformation. The grief-stricken father who discovered his daughter's murder had evolved into a predator who viewed human relationships as strategic calculations. Trust was weakness, mercy was stupidity, and betrayal demanded absolute retribution regardless of cost. Trevor's isolation was complete and deliberate. He'd sold the Scottsdale house where Emma had lived, unable to bear the memories but also recognizing that sentiment was a luxury he couldn't afford. His new residence was a fortified penthouse downtown, equipped with security systems that would make government facilities envious. He employed rotating teams of bodyguards and lived under constant surveillance, trusting no one completely. The media attention from the trial had made Trevor a public figure, though he carefully controlled his image. Interviews portrayed him as a devoted father who'd sought justice through legal channels, never revealing the extensive psychological warfare and manipulation he'd employed. The public saw a sympathetic victim. Trevor's enemies learned to fear a man who destroyed 2 people so thoroughly that even their lawyers had abandoned them. Detective Chun, who'd become reluctantly impressed by Trevor's investigative skills, occasionally consulted him on difficult cases. Trevor's insights into criminal psychology and his resources for gathering evidence made him valuable to law enforcement, though Chin suspected Trevor's methods extended far beyond legal boundaries. "You're dangerous," Chin told him after they'd solved a particularly brutal murder case together. "You understand human weakness too well, and you don't have normal inhibitions about exploiting it." Trevor's response was brutally honest. "I understand that evil exists, that people will destroy innocence for selfish reasons, and that justice requires someone willing to match their ruthlessness. I'm that someone." The philosophy that now governed Trevor's life was simple. Loyalty was rewarded absolutely, betrayal was punished without mercy, and human relationships existed only as strategic alliances. He'd learned that trust was a weapon his enemies would use against him, and he'd eliminated that vulnerability permanently. Emma's grave became Trevor's only connection to genuine emotion. He visited weekly, bringing fresh flowers and maintaining the small monument he'd erected. The grave site was where Emma's drawing had been found, the final message that had triggered his investigation and revenge. Trevor kept the original drawing in a frame by his desk, a reminder of what betrayal cost and why mercy was weakness. But even at Emma's grave, Trevor felt the change in himself. His grief had calcified into something harder and more dangerous. He missed his daughter desperately, but the man who could have been a loving father again had died with her. What remained was a strategist who viewed the world as a battlefield where only the ruthless survived. The revelation that would define Trevor's future came from an unexpected source, Mrs. Rodriguez, Emma's teacher, who requested a meeting 6 months after the trial. Chapter 9. The Price of Justice. Mrs. Rodriguez's call came on a gray December morning, exactly 1 year after Emma's death. Trevor almost declined the meeting, having no desire to revisit painful memories, but something in the teacher's voice suggested urgent importance. They met at a small cafe near Emma's former school, the same place where Trevor had first learned about his daughter's final drawings. "There's something you need to know about Emma," Mrs. Rodriguez began, her hands trembling as she opened a manila folder. "Something I discovered after the trial that changes everything." Trevor's blood chilled as she spread out documents and photographs. Medical records, educational assessments, and therapy notes painted a picture he'd never seen. Emma hadn't just been afraid in her final days. She'd been actively trying to protect Trevor from Diana and Luke's plan. Emma overheard phone conversations, Mrs. Rodriguez explained. She understood more than anyone realized. The drawings, the behavior changes, even her clinginess with you during your last weeks together. She was trying to warn you without knowing how. The documents revealed that Emma had told school counselors about scary dreams where her daddy got hurt. She'd drawn pictures of airplanes crashing and cars exploding, her 5-year-old mind trying to process adult conversations about Trevor's planned murder. Emma had known her mother and Luke intended to kill her father, and she'd been desperately trying to prevent it. But the most devastating revelation was Emma's final conversation with Mrs. Rodriguez, recorded in the teacher's notes, but never shared with investigators. Emma had asked if bad people could be stopped by telling good people about their plans. When Mrs. Rodriguez had assured her that good people always protected children from bad people, Emma had smiled and said, "Daddy is the goodest person. He'll stop them." Trevor's hands shook as he read Emma's actual final words, preserved in Mrs. Rodriguez's careful handwriting. "If something happens to me, tell Daddy I tried to save him. Tell him I love him more than the whole world." The realization that Emma had died not just knowing she was unloved, but believing she was sacrificing herself to protect Trevor shattered the last of his emotional defenses. His daughter hadn't been a random victim. She'd been a 5-year-old hero trying to save her father from monsters she couldn't understand. "She left this for you," Mrs. Rodriguez said, producing Emma's final drawing. Not the one showing her murder, but another picture hidden in her desk. This drawing showed Trevor and Emma holding hands while surrounded by light, with the words "Daddy and Emma forever" written in careful crayon letters. Trevor's breakdown was complete and devastating. The year of cold calculation and ruthless revenge had been built on the assumption that Emma had died afraid and alone. Learning that she'd died trying to protect him, believing he would eventually stop the bad people, revealed the true cost of his transformation. Emma had trusted him to be the goodest person who would make things right. Instead, Trevor had become something his daughter would have feared, a man who destroyed others without mercy, who trusted no one, who viewed human relationships as strategic calculations rather than connections. The man Emma had loved, the hero daddy, who'd read her bedtime stories and held her hand during nightmares, had died with her. What remained was a hollow predator who'd avenged her death, but lost his soul in the process. "She believed in you," Mrs. Rodriguez said gently. "Even at the end, Emma knew you'd find the truth and make things right. But I don't think she would have wanted you to become someone who can't love or trust ever again." Trevor's response was barely audible. "I can't be that man anymore. Too much has been taken. Too much has been done. But you could try to honor what she believed about you," Mrs. Rodriguez suggested. "Emma thought you were a hero because you protected people. Maybe there's a way to do that without losing yourself completely." Trevor left the meeting carrying Emma's final drawing, his worldview fundamentally altered. His revenge against Diana and Luke had been complete and justified. They deserved every consequence they'd received. But Emma's true final message wasn't about vengeance. It was about love, protection, and being the kind of person a child could believe in. The epilogue of Trevor's story wasn't redemption. Too much had been destroyed for that. Instead, it was a recognition that justice and revenge were different concepts, and that becoming a monster to fight monsters dishonored the memory of an innocent child who'd believed in heroes. Trevor Hayes would never again be the trusting husband and father he'd been before Emma's murder. Diana and Luke's betrayal had killed that man as surely as they'd killed his daughter. But Emma's final gift, the knowledge that she'd died believing in his goodness, offered a different path forward. Trevor established the Emma Hayes Foundation, dedicated to protecting children from abuse and neglect. His security firm's resources were redirected toward investigating cases where children were endangered by the adults meant to protect them. He would never love again, never trust completely, never forgive betrayal. But he could honor Emma's belief that he was a protector of innocence. Diana and Luke remained on death row, their appeals consistently denied. They'd destroyed their lives and Emma's for nothing, exactly as Trevor had promised. Justice had been served, though the price, measured in Trevor's lost humanity, was almost too high to bear. Emma's grave bore a new inscription below her name. She believed in heroes. Trevor visited weekly, carrying fresh flowers and the weight of her final message. He'd gotten justice for his daughter, but Emma's true legacy wasn't vengeance. It was the reminder that even in a world full of monsters, someone had to choose to remain human enough to protect the innocent. The man who'd been capable of love had died with Emma. What remained was a guardian who would ensure other children didn't suffer as she had, even if he could never again be the hero she'd believed him to be.